All right. So last week we talked about the Russian and Ukrainian tensions, right? Lots of butting heads going on. There has been lots of news concerning that, and I don't want to go through it because I'm sure you've seen it a million times. I want to talk a little bit about game theory. So game theory is um, a theory concerning how individuals interact. Okay. If you've ever heard of the prisoner's dilemma is a product. The theory behind the prisoner's dilemma is a product of game theory. Essentially, game theory stipulates that you can use repeatable games to predict human behavior, and in certain situations. Okay. In the prisoner's dilemma, for example, you have two prisoners being kept in separate rooms, and essentially you tell each prisoner, hey, if you squeal, you get a better deal. Now, the point is to get both of them to squeal. And actually, there's a lot of math involved too, but I'm not going to bore you with that. Essentially, what it boils down to is if each prisoner takes their options, squeal or don't squeal, it always looks better for them to squeal. So then you do that with both individuals, both of them squeal on each other, and then both of them go to jail for a long time, right? Because they've both squealed. So this is a game that police actually use to get people to turn on each other who don't know what the other person's going to do, right? The whole point of keeping them in separate rooms is to essentially keep from them whether, like, they can't collude with their other prisoner, with their fellow prisoner, right? Anyway, that's just one example of a game. There's also there are games about war and peace, or Bayesian games. They're called. Essentially, they're games with two outcomes. So what's interesting is that game theory can kind of predict what's going to happen in the Russian and Ukrainian situation. And I'm going to explain a little bit further. But so I'm sure, as you guys know now, there has been lots of mobilization by the Russians on the border of Ukraine, but also now the United States and NATO have also moved troops into the area. This is what's called an escalation in game theory. And essentially, what happens when you're dealing with a war and peace game, it always is. So, War and Peace, Hawk and Dove, these are games of strength and perception, right? So you never want to be the person who backs down, right? Because then you look weak to your enemy, but also to your people, right? So it's logical that leaders always want to not look weak, and so leaders never want to back down. This is what makes peace very difficult once you started down the war path. And actually, if you look at situations like this, it's very rare that you actually get to a peaceful scenario. One of the most famous Bayesian games, as it were, that did not occur the way that it was supposed to, according to game theory, was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they were able to avert war by one side essentially taking the L and going home with their tail between their legs and not having a particularly strong attachment to whatever it is. Okay. So by not having a particularly strong attachment to the crisis that was unfolding. But it's hard to say that if we will get there in the Russia and Ukraine situation, because right now both sides have escalated, right? So typically what happens in this game is that one side escalates, the other side then has the option to escalate or back down. Now, if they back down, the conflict ends, in theory, right? Or there's appeasement. We're not going to get into that. But in theory, the conflict ends, right? Because you have one hawk and one dove. That's how these games are referred to, hawks and doves. Hawks are war, doves are peace. And so what typically happens then is that one side escalates and the other side escalates because it is perceived as weaker or less good to take the side of dove, right? So hawk. So unfortunately, as you move your way up the chain that leads to war, there are lots of hawks involved. And at this point, Russia started as the hawk in the sense that they physically moved more troops to the border first. But there was an option that Europe and NATO had the option to dove, which was to not move troops to the border and to not threaten sanctions and other things. But that has happened now. So what worries me is that we're starting to see the coalescence into a more and more hawkish position that eventually leads to war. Now, it is my ultimate hope that there will not be war of any kind. There are lots of people who have mentioned it, but if there's a war between the United States and Russia, you can essentially kiss humanity goodbye. There will be effectively a nuclear, especially if it becomes a hot war. It doesn't look good. We're both nuclear armed powers with people who want to look strong at the helm. By the way, Bayesian games also work in the nuclear context. Very scary, very scary. So the point of my talking to you about this is that the direction we are heading looks grim, and political science and game theory both predict that at this point we're going to continue along the hawkish path. Now, it is entirely possible that either Russia or EU and NATO, US and NATO pick dove at some point, that one of them backs down and does not continue to escalate. But the more escalation occurs, the more likely it is that there is war by accident or on purpose. And right now, we have just started heading down the path of double escalation. It is now my ultimate hope that one side, honestly, I don't care which side, one side picks dove. Because if not, it's going to get really terrifying really fast. Whether that has to do with an actual war being fought on the Ukrainian border or what have you. But essentially, we have taken two groups that are traditionally hostile to each other, and we have caused them to, not we, generally, humanity, is witnessing them begin to escalate. And if they continue to escalate, it doesn't look good. So here's to hoping that one of them pulls a dove, but I am not optimistic.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye for now.